The United Nations has once again turned its focus to Iran, as the world's attention shifts to a new and uncertain chapter in the ongoing nuclear standoff. The halls of international diplomacy are abuzz with tension, and the stakes have rarely felt higher. On September 26, 2025, the Security Council voted to reimpose sweeping sanctions on the Islamic Republic. The decision came after a dramatic session, with diplomats from around the globe weighing the risks and consequences of such a move. This snapback was the result of months of failed negotiations and mounting fears over Iran's nuclear ambitions. Despite repeated attempts at dialogue, the gulf between Iran and the West only widened, leaving little room for compromise. The core issue remains Iran's nuclear program and suspicions it's edging closer to weapons capability, an accusation Tehran vehemently denies. International inspectors have faced increasing restrictions, fueling further mistrust and anxiety among world powers. The snapback mechanism, built into the 2015 nuclear deal, allows any original signatory to restore all UN sanctions if Iran is seen as violating the agreement. This provision was designed as a last resort, a safeguard to prevent unchecked nuclear escalation. Its activation marks a collapse of trust and a return to confrontation between Iran and the West. Years of painstaking diplomacy have unraveled, replaced by suspicion and the threat of further escalation. The 2015 deal had lifted sanctions in exchange for strict limits on Iran's nuclear activities, but the US withdrawal in 2018 began to unravel that fragile balance. Since then, efforts to revive the agreement have repeatedly stalled, with each side blaming the other for the impasse. Now, with sanctions back in place, the world faces a more dangerous standoff. Regional tensions are rising, and the risk of miscalculation or conflict has grown ever more real. The reimposed sanctions target Iran's oil, finance and shipping sectors, and include a renewed arms embargo. These measures are designed to squeeze Iran's economy and limit its ability to fund its nuclear and military programs. Oil, finance, shipping sectors, renewed arms embargo. The restrictions are some of the toughest ever imposed, aiming to isolate Iran from the global economy and cut off vital revenue streams. The aim, to cripple Iran's finances and force it back to compliance. But the pressure is not just economic, it's also psychological, sending a clear message that the international community will not tolerate further nuclear brinkmanship. But the impact will ripple far beyond Iran's government, affecting ordinary Iranians and reshaping regional dynamics. Everyday life in Iran is already strained, and these new sanctions threaten to deepen hardship for millions, while neighboring countries brace for instability. Humanitarian organizations warn of worsening shortages of food and medicine, while regional leaders scramble to prevent the crisis from spilling across borders. The sanctions are not just a diplomatic tool, they are a force that will shape lives and politics across the Middle East. The stakes are high, not just for the Middle East, but for the global non-proliferation regime. The credibility of international agreements and the future of nuclear diplomacy hang in the balance. The decision in New York has set off a chain of events that will define international relations for years to come. The world is watching, uncertain of what the next chapter will bring. As leaders debate and citizens worry, the world is bracing for the consequences of a new era of sanctions and the unpredictable future that lies ahead. The road to renewed sanctions was paved with failed diplomacy. What began as a hopeful attempt to resolve one of the world's most pressing nuclear challenges soon unraveled into a series of missed opportunities and deepening mistrust. In the tense weeks leading up to the decisive vote, European powers, France, Germany, and the UK, launched urgent last-ditch efforts to salvage the nuclear deal. Their diplomats shuttled between capitals, holding late-night meetings and issuing joint statements, all in hopes of finding common ground. But Iran's expanding nuclear activities, coupled with its demands for permanent sanctions relief, left the Europeans unconvinced and wary. The technical progress Iran made only heightened fears that time was running out for a peaceful solution. Tehran's proposals were seen as insufficient and easily reversible, while Iran accused the West of breaking promises first. Each side pointed to the other's failures, fueling a cycle of accusation and disappointment. The trust that once enabled negotiation had evaporated. Meetings that once brimmed with cautious optimism now ended in silence or frustration. Talks in New York became confrontations, not negotiations. Instead of compromise, there were only ultimatums and warnings. The final breakdown came when Europe rejected Iran's last offer, calling it unserious and lacking in real guarantees. The disappointment was palpable, and the sense of failure hung heavy in the air. This public rejection signaled the end of diplomacy and cleared the way for the snapback at the UN. The world watched as the diplomatic window slammed shut. The impasse was rooted in mutual blame and a collapse of political will. Neither side was willing to make the first move toward compromise, and both accused the other of acting in bad faith. Both sides dug in, convinced of their own righteousness. The atmosphere grew more combative, and the possibility of reconciliation faded with each passing day. The return to sanctions became inevitable. The Security Council's vote was less a decision than a confirmation of what everyone already knew. Diplomacy had failed. The diplomatic process that once offered hope had finally run aground. The rooms where agreements were once forged now stood empty, echoing with the absence of dialogue. The world now faces the fallout of that failure as uncertainty and tension ripple across borders and the consequences of broken diplomacy begin to unfold. In a last attempt to avoid sanctions, Iran's foreign minister presented a new proposal to Europe. The offer included limited access for international inspectors, just one of several undeclared sites, and a vague plan to address Iran's stockpile of highly enriched uranium within 45 days. European diplomats saw these as minimal gestures, lacking transparency and detail. Iran's main demand: the permanent removal of the snapback mechanism. For Europe, this was unacceptable. The snapback was their only leverage. The imbalance was clear temporary, reversible steps from Iran in exchange for permanent concessions from the West. The proposal was quickly dismissed as a stalling tactic. Without meaningful guarantees, Europe saw no path forward. The last diplomatic window closed. The snapback process moved ahead. The chance for compromise was lost. The Security Council's vote exposed deep divisions among world powers, highlighting the complexities of international diplomacy. France, Germany, and the UK led the push for sanctions, arguing Iran's breaches left them no choice. They emphasized the need for a strong response to uphold international agreements and maintain global security. Russia, a longtime Iranian ally, tried to delay the snapback with a 6-month pause for more talks, but failed to gain support. Moscow's stance underscored its strategic interests in the region and its desire to counterbalance Western influence. The US, though not directly driving this vote, backed the European move, seeing it as vindication of its hardline stance. Washington viewed the reimposed sanctions as a critical component of its broader strategy to isolate Iran and curb its nuclear ambitions. The reimposed sanctions fit Washington's strategy of isolating Iran. US officials believe that economic pressure is the most effective way to bring Iran back to the negotiating table. Many developing nations watched with concern, fearing instability and economic fallout. These countries worry that increased tensions could lead to broader regional conflicts, affecting global trade and security. The vote was more than a rebuke of Iran. It revealed a fractured global order. The divisions within the Security Council reflect deeper geopolitical rifts that complicate collective action on international security issues. The split between Western powers and Russia, with China often siding with Moscow, showed how hard it is to reach consensus on security issues. This lack of unity undermines the effectiveness of international institutions in addressing global threats. The world is now more divided on Iran than ever. Public opinion is polarized, with some viewing the sanctions as necessary, while others see them as exacerbating tensions. The Security Council's authority has been weakened. The inability to present a united front on such a critical issue raises questions about the future role of the UN in maintaining global peace and security. The risk of escalation has grown. Military posturing and increased tensions in the Middle East could lead to unintended consequences, drawing more countries into the conflict. The international community faces a new era of uncertainty. Economic instability and geopolitical tensions are likely to have far-reaching impacts on global markets and international relations. The consequences will be global. The decisions made by key nations today will shape the geopolitical landscape for years to come, affecting millions of lives around the world. Tehran is expected to respond defiantly to the new sanctions. Hardliners in Iran's parliament are likely to push for retaliation, including ending cooperation with the UN's nuclear watchdog. Expelling inspectors would blind the world to Iran's nuclear activities, raising fears of secret weapons work. Some in Tehran are even debating withdrawal from the Nuclear Non-Proliferation Treaty, a move that would signal open pursuit of nuclear arms. Such steps could provoke preemptive action from regional rivals like Israel. Iran will also launch a diplomatic offensive, framing the sanctions as unjust and rallying domestic support. The risk of miscalculation and conflict is higher than ever. The new sanctions will hit ordinary Iranians hardest. Iran's economy, already battered by previous sanctions and mismanagement, will face deeper decline. The cost of living will soar as the rial plunges and imports become scarce. Even humanitarian goods like medicine will be harder to obtain, as banks avoid transactions with Iran. Hospitals will struggle with shortages of critical medicines and equipment. Unemployment will rise, and hope for a better future will fade, especially among the youth. Social unrest and brain drain are likely to intensify. The sanctions inflict a deep wound on Iranian society. The human cost will be severe and lasting. The sanctions will reshape Iran's political landscape. Hardliners will be emboldened, claiming the West can never be trusted. Moderates and reformists will be sidelined, their arguments for engagement discredited. The government will likely crack down on dissent, blaming unrest on foreign interference. Tensions may rise within the ruling elite as the administration struggles to manage the economic crisis. The regime will use the sanctions to rally the public, framing hardship as resistance to foreign aggression. Instead of weakening the regime, the pressure may make it more repressive and isolated. Iran's path will become more confrontational, both at home and abroad. The snapback of sanctions will deepen global divides. The US and Europe are now firmly aligned, but at the cost of alienating Russia and China. The Security Council's split weakens its authority and complicates future cooperation on security issues. Iran will turn to Russia and China for support, accelerating the formation of an anti-Western bloc. Europe, caught between the US and Iran, loses leverage as a mediator. The risk of military conflict in the Middle East rises as diplomatic guardrails fall away. Regional rivals may ramp up their own military programs in response. The collapse of diplomacy has made the region more unstable. A single misstep could trigger a wider war. The world faces a new era of uncertainty and risk. The world now faces a period of heightened risk and uncertainty. Iran's next moves, expelling inspectors or leaving the NPT, could escalate the crisis dramatically. The regime's ability to manage economic pain and public unrest will be tested. Humanitarian consequences will draw global scrutiny and pressure for relief. Diplomatic options are narrowing, but some hope remains for mediation. The actions of Russia, China, and the West will shape the crisis's trajectory. The stakes, a nuclear-armed Iran or a devastating regional war. The path forward is perilous and peace is far from certain.